Hi everyone, warm greetings to you all. It's an honor and a privilege to introduce our legend of neonatology, Professor Dr. Siddarth Ramji. Dr. Siddarth Ramji was born on 13th of November in 1956. From his initial years of residency and subsequently as an administrator, his initial years were spent at Maulana Azad Medical College in New Delhi. But what brought him into the international limelight was his human work with the National Neonatology Forum and his passion for research, especially his fascinating work with resuscitation of newborn babies in room air and compared to pure oxygen. I think he had collaborated with a lot of international stalwarts in this area, and that brought him maximally to the forefront. Through his exemplary work in newborn care, he has been an inspiration to a lot of young neonatologists, including me. So it's an honor and privilege to interview him for the NNF Video Legacy Project. Sir, yours was a very gratifying career. Could you please tell us briefly about your career path?
Well, my career began as a postgraduate resident at Subject Hospital, where I went to do my MD Pediatrics in Delhi. But that was also the starting point of my career in neonatology. So I began, after I finished my MD, in fact, I ended up doing almost 3 years of my senior residency only in the newborn unit, working with Professor Santosh Bhargav. And thereafter, without a break, I joined as a faculty at Maulana Azad Medical College. And I was fortunate that I did exclusive newborn care all through from the day I joined as a faculty till the point I retired. When we began, of course, we were a Department of Pediatrics, but in 2002 we branched out into a separate department in neonatology, and then of course we started a DM program a little later in 2016. But all through this journey, I worked entirely with newborns. I was fortunate that I had the privilege of working with people who had the vision of how newborn care was to develop in India. And I think I entered at a time when newborn care was kind of shifting to its importance. So I've been there from its very inception till what we are now. So I've been fortunate to able to see the entire bandwidth and spectrum of how newborn care began to transform from being a non-entity to something that today is so important, a separate specialty. It's in the focus of the national government, it's the focus of the country. So I think it's been gratifying, and I've worked from not only tertiary care, I had the fortune of working from primary care till tertiary care. So I think on the whole, and now at the level of policy making, so I think on the whole, it's been a very satisfying journey that I've had.
Very good to know about your career path, sir. Can you please let us know in which year did you join NNF as a member, and what are the happenings around that time you joined NNF, sir?
Yeah, so as you know, NNF got established in 1980, but I think from 1981 was when the organizational structure began to function, and that was the time when I had just started my residency in Subject Hospital. I joined the NNF in 1986, and I then continued to work closely with the NNF because I think NNF as a group at that time was a very coherent group, a small group. I think it couldn't be more than 200 odd people, but all very deeply committed to newborn care. Their primary purpose was to ensure that newborn care was provided. And just to let you know, the only criteria that NNF had for membership was there's a single line which said, anybody who is interested in the care of newborn. And I think this was the only organization which actually then brought in physicians, nurses, obstetricians, social scientists, industry. I think we are the only people who had industry as partners with us, and I'll tell you at a later point how this actually transformation happened. So today what we see in neonatal industry, in terms of equipments, I think NNF has been very way ahead of its time in terms of organization structure. I then became the joint secretary. In those days, the joint secretary come treasurer was what is selected, and that person would serve for 2 years and would automatically become the secretary for another 2 years. So actually, it's a 4-year term that we all spent, and presidentships are also for at least 2 years. So I was 91-92, I was the treasurer and joint secretary of the forum, and then 93-94 I became the president. I had the pleasure of working with two eminent neonatologists who were presidents then, first Professor D.K. Guha and then Professor Jayant, who was the president when I was the secretary of the forum. And then of course there was a long hiatus in terms of my working within the organized structure. I mean, I was not a member in terms of, I was not a OB member or anything else until I became president. But I continued to serve NNF in various capacities as it grew.
Thank you, sir. Good to know about that. Just coming to the people who were there in NNF during your tenureship, both as a Secretary General and then as a President, can you let us know who were the most prominent personalities that helped shape up your tenureship during those periods? And I think you would have seen people from the private setup and also the public sector. So could you tell us, the differences you found between these two set of people?
See, when NNF came into being, there was nothing called newborn in the private sector. You should remember, 1980, there was no newborn in the private sector, or whatever newborn was there were in institutions, academic institutions largely, all through. And so the people who came in when NNF got created were all people who were working as in eminent public sector institutions, academic institutions, who are keen to start. So, I mean, the people who began this whole journey were people like Professor Santosh Bhargav from Delhi, Professor Owen Baku at PGI, Dr. Narang, Dr. Simin Irani, Namida Fernandez in Mumbai, Dr. Jayam, Dr. Meherban Singh, and many more. I think these were the stalwarts who actually initiated the whole concept of wanting a separate group who will push the newborn agenda. And I should say that I had the fortune of working with them all through, because working in Safdarjung Hospital as a resident exposed me to all these people, and not only to people from within India, but also they had friends and colleagues from overseas, both overseas Indians and others, who felt very strongly for India moving forward to create newborn care and whatever help they could give to structure. So I think we had a very good, committed set of people. And most important, I think many of these people were very eminent people, senior professors, but when they met, it didn't matter who you were, whether you were a young resident who had joined, a young faculty, or a professor. Everybody worked with the same degree of commitment and were all on par and doing the same thing, And so I think that was a very important feature. And it was not just that they sat in institutions; they also went into the periphery, worked. So whatever NNF did, all these people actually did with their own hands, because they had to convince the government, particularly, that the newborn agenda had to have a separate place in national program of India's health program. And so I think they were very different people. I think so. I don't think I saw any difference. I mean, many of them were many years my senior, but I think we just worked as very good friends, committed, only being that we were all committed to newborn care.
Thank you, sir. During your journey in NNF, could you recollect some of the watershed moments which were there? Some anecdotes which you had to tell us?
Yes. So I think the first thing we need to remember that when there was no newborn care, so something had to be standardized. So the first task that NNF did was to bring out sets of documents which act like recommendations, which are consensus documents built by this group in consultation with themselves, ICMR and others. So So the initial were all sets of documents that we created, right, which people could use. I think a very important turning point in NNF was the introduction of newborn into the mainstream agenda of the RCH. You may recollect that we had in the beginning something called the Child Survival and Safe Motherhood Program, CSSM, which was introduced in 1992, which essentially at that time had diarrhea and ARI from the child. And that was the first time when we actually brought in essential newborn care into that package. So for the first time, newborn care in a separate place in the total scenario. And I still remember that this entire essential newborn care document was actually the training package was written by us. I remember Professor Bhargav, myself, Dr. Bhan, MK Bhan, and a few other committed people. We actually had the first workshop in Gwalior, the Gwalior Medical College, where we had doctors from the health centers. And actually, the first day's training program was written by us with the previous night. And then based on the feedback on the day one, we wrote the contents for the second day. So that was we just sat through the whole night and then just drafted out this whole training package with us. And so I think that was the first turning point where newborn became in the national agenda and the government agreed to incorporate that. Now, we also realized that this essential newborn care cannot function if you do not provide training to health workers and if you don't provide them instrumentation. So, 93, when I was the secretary, we were fortunate that we got funding from the WHO. We got money, but not equipment. We strongly stood by and said, we don't want WHO to give us any equipment. We wanted to get the money, and that was the time when we actually, Professor Paul, myself, Dr. Yarari, a few others, we actually scripted out our requirements of the type of equipment. We started with the labor room. So we wrote for what a labor radiant warmer should have, and what should ambu bag we have, what about the suction. And then we said we need jaundice is another problem, so we also looked for phototherapy units. So that was the first time when we actually floated a tender for all Indian firms wherever they were, and there were a whole range of young biomedical engineers. And as I told you, NNF had industry as partners. So we had all these young engineers who would set up as entrepreneurs, were members. And so they all came forward. So they actually brought in prototypes, which we tested at all our newborn units. And finally, we actually operationalized. And one precondition for all this was that these equipment have to be such that they can work under a wide range of voltage, wide temperature fluctuations, and such that they could easily be assembled together by the so-called refrigeration mechanic, which was there in the immunization program. The EPI every district had so that was the situation. And so in fact, I actually operationalized the first in the district of Bhilwara in Rajasthan, Professor Bhargav and myself, and actually assembled the first radiant warmer myself, using the whatever guidelines we had set, which was actually a proof that what we wanted actually happened. So we did it, started with 4 districts but went on to 20. So we operationalized that. I think that was a major turning point, because the equipment that you see today, it was these industries who at that time came in, was a starting point when India started becoming, over time. Now today we can say we are reasonably self-sufficient with most of our neutral equipment, barring some critical care. But I think that was a turning point for all these people. And this industry partnership in NNF was a big change. So that was, I think, the biggest, and I think the only example where, to the best of my knowledge, WHO actually gave money to a professional organization and didn't give equipment. That was a big change that WHO made from the usual. Of course, the other thing that actually happened was around 2000, when NNF by that time had huge documentation, and WHO for the first time was, and 2000 was the year when the newborn week started, and Professor Shashi Vani was then the president, and she actually got Prime Minister Vajpayee to launch the National Newborn Week, which actually, in a way, brought government commitment to newborn care. I think that was a very, very important milestone in India's newborn healthcare, where government actually committed to the fact that the rest is all very history. The SNCU story began. SNCUs, if you know, the first SNCU got established in Guna and in Shivpuri of Madhya Pradesh in 2007. I was there to have it set up. And in those days, before that, with UNICEF, NNF actually developed the toolkit for the SNCUs. And then in those days, NNF used to actually go to each district with the district DM, PWD, the Public Works Department, and the Health Department, and actually sit there for 3 days, look for the space, identify the design, firm up the design, and get the DM to sign out the financial release for the construct. And then after that, they would order the equipment, and then we would actually go and install them and train them. So I think that was how NNF, the initial, I think 100 plus SNCUs came up, when NNF actually went with each district by district to set them up. And of course, then the system itself grew. And then, of course, now we have the FPNC and everything else that's happening. So, very, very important. And one more important milestone, when WHO wrote its newborn component, they had a meeting, and Professor Shashivani was then the president. And when she went there and they said, oh, we need recommendations, she produced all the documents that NNF had prepared in the last 15 years. Means all that we see today in largely, I think to a great extent, India's contribution and NNF's contribution, and that is what is now translated into essential newborn care, and became the platform against which things grow. So I think you need to realize that NNF has been the primary driver for newborn care in this country. The government entirely relied on NNF till the first 15-20 years, even now, but that was the period when we were the only advisors to the government on newborn care. We were great advocates. Then with the launch of Newborn Week and all the rest, we became a big force to reckon with, and we became important not only in this country but overseas. So I think India has made huge contributions, and today let me tell you that our SAARC countries, many African countries, are getting equipment manufactured by our Indian people there. That is, I think, India's huge contribution to the third world and other countries in terms of supporting newborn care.
Sir, it's been really inspiring and gratifying to know about that. I think the role that NNF had played, the initial stalwarts had played in the policy making that happened over the last 3 decades. So let's move on to a different topic, sir. One of your other areas of interest, that is going to be research. I think now NNF has been moving into research policies and teaching research for residents. And so what has been your take on that, sir?
Well, I think that's very important. Somebody has to push the agenda forward. In those days, research was not the primary focus. Of course, the research was different nature when NNF got involved. We were involved in operationalizing, different levels of care within the health systems, right? But I think it's very important. Every organization needs to push. Today, we have a postdoc program, the DM neonatology. We have fellows. We have many more, and there are so many important questions for ourselves. So I think it's important that every organization plays a role, and I think for NNF to be playing that role is vital. I think it's important that they stimulate, provide a platform for young minds to showcase their research, and NNF should facilitate that happening. We have done that through our conventions, we have done that through our journal, and I think it should continue to build capacity. Very important.
Thank you, sir. NNF is now a very large organization with a lot of committees assisting in diverse neuratal specialties. You have been prominently associated with some of these committees, sir. Could you brief us on your association with these committees and how we see the evolution of these committees over the years, sir?
So, you must go back when NNF conventions were held in the past, they were not like the way it's today. I mean, we didn't have lectures and research sessions. Each of the convention had a theme, lasted 2 days, and using the theme, they became the recommendations. I'll give an example. This was the output from the second convention, which was held in Mumbai, right? Education and training in neonatology. So this 2-day convention got translated in recommendations. So we had, each convention acted as the primary method of generating recommendations. We invited people from all walks of life, all stakeholders. So we have had things like education, levels of care, separately primary care. We have had designs and norms for our newborn units, equipment norms. I mean, the nursing curriculum. This is another one. This was in 92, where we had a separate what should be taught for neonatal nurses. So we had a separate workshop, and we did a working group. We developed a curriculum for this. So I think it in many ways the genesis of committees today are different from the others. I have been of course, my primary involvement with committee was essentially with resuscitation. When we launched the National Newborn Resuscitation, NSSK was launched, and then we had the National Newborn Resuscitation Guidelines developed. I chaired that for several years. And now, as you know, that the National Newborn Resuscitation training, we have joined with IAP. We have been able to bring out a textbook, which NNF and IAP are jointly committed to do. And I along with Professor Piyush Gupta, who was the president of IAP at that time, and me, we have been the chief editors of this. So my involvement has not been with too many committees in that sense. I've been assisting, but I've not been actually involved. But resuscitation is what it was, because that's been my lifetime work that I have been involved in.
Sir, very good to know, sir. And it's also good to know about the various policy documents from NNF, and which had a genesis during your time, initial years. And now with the onset of clinical practice guidelines, which are currently under revision currently. So how do you feel that these guidelines had their evolution during the earlier documents which are released from NNF, sir?
Yeah, so it was, I think, after SNCU started developing from 2007 onwards, it was felt that we had the FBNC guideline, but it also felt now that things were happening at multiple levels. It was important that we have standardized clinical practice guidelines. So I think 2010, if I remember right, was when the first set of guidelines were released, and we have improved upon some over time. So I think that these have been very good because they have evidence base for them. They are practical and pragmatic, and as any guideline, as new evidence generates, they need to keep changing. And I think it offers an advantage because, one, that we have been able to adapt these evidences at least into our national guidelines. The government, in part of the facility-based newborn care, has adapted many. We also tell most institutions, look, you have a base on which you should practice all of them. So I think people who practice should follow these. It's a good working way to look at evidence. So I think that it's an evolving process, and I think the group that's working there, which is led by Professor Praveen, has been doing excellent work, and I think this will keep growing. And I think this is the time when evidence-based medicine is so important, and the hard work that goes behind creating it is looked forward to. And I think I don't know whether you know that during the COVID, they brought in guidelines for COVID, and this was judged as one of the best guidelines that were developed globally. So I think you can see that NNF's groups have been working, have very great, a lot of resources, great capacity to do that. And these guidelines, I think, are applicable not only in India, elsewhere too. I think we have grown much beyond what we started with, but and obviously as time demands, we need to keep, kind of evolving.
Thank you, sir. It's good to know that NNF was behind a lot of newborn recommendations which came out from Government of India. What about other major collaborations, sir, with other international organizations and our fraternal organizations like the IAP, FOXY, during your administrative tenure? And what do you see are the impact of these associations with our other organizations?
So, I think, as I said, obstetricians are always part of NNF right from the beginning. We never saw them as separate because we realized that without them we can't do anything. Similarly, nurses are always part of it. In fact, we were the earliest people who wrote curriculums for nurses. The nurses have always been active members of our relationship with IAP has been like a roller coaster of sorts, because the genesis of it goes back to the very creation of NNF, which was at a time when I think IAP was not willing at that time to create a subgroup for newborn. Today they have it, but I think otherwise it's been a bit of a roller coaster relationship. I wouldn't know whether what we have it formally with agencies, but we've been very, very close to UNICEF. UNICEF has been a great partner and support for us. We have supported them in everything that we have done in this country. We've also indirectly supported the WHO in whatever capacity, not the NNF always, but sometimes members of NNF contribute. So there's a name for NNF to go, but it uses the guidelines for NNF. So that's been, I think, it's important for us to keep engaged with all. And in this era, I also think that newborn and healthcare can't happen only within the health sector. We need to move beyond. I have been a little unhappy to see the industry sidelined in recent years by the NNF. Otherwise, every convention, we gave them platform where we could brainstorm about technology, equipment, and so on. I think it's time that NNF partnered beyond with like institutes of technology, basic scientists, and others, sociologists, because they're all very important for us to move the newborn agenda forward.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you are an international renowned researcher, and your most renowned work was your fascinating research on resuscitation of babies with room air instead of pure oxygen. So I just wanted to know who are the most important international faculty with whom you collaborated during your years in neonatal care, and can you share some anecdotes on them, sir?
You mean you're talking about NNF's association?
Your association as well as NNF.
So let me begin with NNF. I think two people who right from the beginning had played a sterling role in supporting. One is Professor Vidyasagar and second was Dr. Bhutani. I think they have been right from the beginning. I remember even in the very second convention, we had them here. So I think they were people who actually had a big role to play. Many more people have since joined, including as a result of the fact that many of our DM students from this country have gone overseas and settled down, and then their contacts. So they have done that. My own journey has been with Professor Ola Saugstad, with whom we collaborated for over 2 decades on the room air resuscitation, and the third partner, Professor Max Vento from Spain. These have been the 3 people with whom I have worked for a long time. Of course, I interacted with many others, but I think these are 3 people who have contributed to the research. And I think NNF has benefited greatly from their presence. In fact, I brought them across to India and made them meet all the eminent people in newborn who were heading all the newborn units at the time, and we had some very good discussions, and as a result, one of the large collaborative international studies included many of the Indian sites along with the international sites. So I think the newborn platform for me is not NNF alone. I think newborn platform for me is much larger now. I think we have grown much larger. I look at newborn in general across, as long as a person who's interested, I'm very happy to engage with them and move the agenda forward for India.
Thank you, sir. Now let's talk a little bit about your presidency tenure in 2022. When our nation was recovering from the debilitating COVID pandemic and physical meetings have restarted. Could you please let us know about some of the major initiatives that NNF took during this time? During the time of your presidency tenure.
Well, my task at that time was rather unenvious. NNF, as you know, had gone a little off track for a couple of years prior to that and had gone off the radar screen with the government. So my task was essentially to bring back the credibility of NNF with the government and bring it back mainstream. So I essentially facilitated that process, and I think I'm happy to state that we are back on the center stage with the government as far as the National Newborn Care Program and its implementation is concerned. So I think that's what I did, and I gave some ideas about how we should take forward in terms of how we do conferences, how we run our fellowship programs, how we accredit our health, our various health facilities, and so on. So I think that was essentially my contribution, and I'll continue to do that to the best of my ability as time goes on.
Thank you, sir. Very good to know about that. You had spent roughly around 3.5 decades. You had offered your human services at Maulana Azad Medical College in New Delhi. So you would have had a bird's eye view of the evolution of newborn care in the public sector in our capital city. Can you describe the changes in clinical practice which happened over a period of time in terms of management of the common newborn illnesses, and what changes happened in the nature of equipment which were procured in that particular hospital?
So let me tell you, I was fortunate that at the time when I was doing my residency, Subjang Hospital had a huge grant from WHO. So large amount of equipment, right from tertiary care down to secondary level equipment, ventilators, so on, were actually got into the system at that point of time, and I got to see how they all function. So when I came to Maulana Azad, which was nowhere near that, my task was easier because I could use that knowledge to start revamping this facility. So I had a good idea of equipment, and I also was fortunate at that time that while in Subjang, I was working with one of the foremost biomedical engineers in the country, Professor Guha, who was then the professor and head of biomedical engineering at the IIT Delhi. And so as a result of some collaborative work we had done, I could actually knew what kind of equipment to set up. There was a time when I could actually repair equipment myself. I used to get all the service manuals and do that. But more important than that, I think I had to bring in a different culture with my nurses so that they understood what newborn care is all about. And I think whatever areas, whether it's asphyxia, I had to work a great deal with our obstetric colleagues. I used to spend hours and hours in the labor room in all shifts with the obstetric people to tell them how they ought to be doing. And till the day I retired, I actually continued to audit every stillbirth and every asphyxia that took place in the labor room. And I used to, pull up the obstetric residents for that, because I said it was very important for us. They didn't do it well. We made sure that whatever evidence guidelines were there, we used them, right? And in fact, all these are areas where we actually did research in our own institution with our then pediatric postgraduate MD students. And so the evolution of newborn care there was essentially what is happening nationally and globally at that time. And we were also generating the evidence from all the research that we were doing. So I think on the whole, I would say that we were always ahead of our times in making sure that we were doing what is correct. So unfortunately, that's how all our MD pediatric resident got trained, and then when they put the neonatal residents for DM, continued the same. I think on the whole, I have had the benefit of seeing this, but don't forget, I've also had the benefit of working while I was all there in the primary care. In fact, when the home-based newborn care module was first developed, I was the first one who actually piloted it in Bihar, in the Nalanda district. I used to spend weeks together sitting there with the Ashas And actually, at that time, we had the government of India had a collaboration with the Norwegia-India partnership. We had funds from there, and I actually helped revise these modules. Actually, I tested them on the ground, and I did that for several months in Bihar. So I have the benefit of. Then, of course, I continue to monitor our SNCUs, even though I was a faculty. I was very grateful to all my colleagues in pediatrics who would chip in my absence to allow me to continue to pursue newborn care, not only within the institution, but at the national level. So I think on the whole, it's been wonderful to see the transformation that has taken place in India. I've had the benefit of looking at primary to tertiary, seeing the evolution of all policies. And well, I must say that I think at this point of time, I have been part of every expert group of the government on newborn care. And finally, at this particular moment, when the INAP was reviewed, I was the co-chair of the TAG for the Government of India when INAP was reviewed for this country. So I think it's been a great journey, and very happy to see the transformation India has made.
So it gives us goosebumps to know about all this information, sir. So this would be my last question for you. Could you please brief us on what is the role your family played in shaping your glorious career?
Well, I think they withstood my absence from home for long periods. They got used to my long stays in hospital. I used to very often go 10 in the night, come back at 5 in the morning, go back to work at 7. And I think they put up with all my idiosyncrasies, and I used to be a 24/7 workaholic, if you like to call that. And so I think they have been very, very supportive of whatever. So without the support, I don't think I could have done all that I had to do. So I must thank them for all their tolerance of my persistent absence from home for long periods.
So thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time and sharing your thoughts and experience with us. You have given us a broad insight into your journey in neonatology and your exemplary work with NNF, which has enhanced the care of our precious but vulnerable little babies. And we will be ever thankful to you for that. We wish you, on behalf of NNF Tamil Nadu and NNF India, a very happy and healthy life to come, sir. Thank you. It's a small memento on behalf of the NNF Legacy Project of Central NNF, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.